It's wonderful to be here today. And I must admit, I was supremely thrilled when I heard that I would be talking to Mr. Gurcharan Das. Uh, I went through this book, The Dilemma of the Indian Liberal, and it was such clear, lucid, easy reading. And as we know, easy reading is not always easy to write, but you make it look effortless, you make it look light. How long did it take you to kind of get that style?
Well, a lifetime. And frankly, for me, for my one advice to writers, my one advice to writers would be to write as you speak. And that's how you'll find a voice. And once you've found the voice, then you're on your way. And the other quality you mentioned, lightness. There's a Sanskrit word called laghima. Patanjali uses it also in his Yoga Sutras. It's one of the siddhis, meaning one of the perfections of human beings, which means being light, living lightly. And that actually is the, I mean, if I had a motto of mine, it would be to live lightly. And so, can I see that? The 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 way to achieve that lightness, I've also recently written a memoir, and it's called Another Sort of Freedom. So what is that other sort of freedom? It is in fact in the dedication to this book, which is, it's I've dedicated it to the happy few who don't take themselves too seriously. In other words, take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. Now, that's a good aspiration. M- Most of us don't achieve it.
Lovely. I felt the lightness coming through.
Great.
It's just been great in both books.
Well, in this one
Yes.
particularly, I wanted the reader to smile or laugh at least once on every page. And so that's, you get the idea of what another sort of freedom is. And that actually to me is moksha, a very non spiritual, non religious ideal of moksha.
That is the freedom you're referring to.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the dilemma of an Indian liberal. How many here would who would describe yourself as liberal?
That's the
That's
majority, I would
that's
say.
quite a lot. That's quite a lot. But liberal nowadays has sometimes become a dirty word, despite of what for me is its very good meaning. It's like feminist or woke. You know, it's given other meanings. And what happened? When did liberal become a dirty word, and why?
Well, part of it arises from the confusion. You know, I'm a classical liberal, and but a lot of people who were progressives during between the wars, two world wars, and especially when President Roosevelt was the president of America, these progressives began calling themselves liberal. So now we have a difference between a left liberal and a classical liberal. And a left liberal is one that often gives the bad name to liberals. So it's a confused word, and it's well, that's part of history. I mean,
The left liberal seeking maybe more government control as opposed
yeah.
to free market.
No, so the thing is that both left liberals and classical liberals believe in social liberty, political liberty. But the classical liberals also believe in economic liberty, which is from, that is, they believe that the market is a better supplier of goods than bureaucrats. because the left liberals then don't believe in the market. So a bureaucrat has to decide who gets a license, and of course, as you know, my becoming a liberal had something to do with the yeah.
You speak about how India's economic independence didn't happen in 1947.
That's right. It happened in 1991, and in fact, I grew up in Nehru's India, the age of hope, and my parents, the family, were all believers in socialism. And then I got a job with a company that made Vicks Vapor Rub.
And who has used VIX? Right?
There, we have more people using Vicks than liberals.
Now we need to study the correlation there.
Anyway, one year there was a flu in the country, and we sold a hell of a lot of Vicks Vapor Rub. And we thought, we had kept the chemist shop stocked all through, ran 3 shifts. We thought we had done so much good for millions of homes during this. But I was the head of the company. I got a summons that we had broken the law. And they asked me to come to Delhi to explain, because the punishment for breaking the law was 3 years in jail. And what was the law? It was a law which was our license said we could only produce so many tons of Vicks Vapor Rub in a year. And because of the flu, we had overshot it by 30%. So I went to Delhi and I was treated like a criminal. The joint secretary kept me waiting for hours, and then when he called me in, I had 2 lawyers on both sides, and um, the officer, the joint secretary, was reading the newspaper. He kept reading, and while we kept sitting before him, until he finally decided that he wanted to stop reading the paper, and then he says to me, "Kya?" I said, "Sahab, आप बताइए क्या? You have summoned us." And he says, "Let me see the summons." And then he reads the summons and he says, "You've broken the law." So I explained to him about the flu and why we thought we had done so much good at this year. And, and he said again, "You broke the law." And I said, "Yes." "So you had confessed that?" "Yes, we broke the law. But," he says, "I don't want to know buts. You guys in the private sector are all crooks. And I want to make, especially you multinational crooks, and I want to make an example of your company to the other companies, that you can't lord it about just because you work for American companies or whatever. You have to obey the laws of our country. You've broken the law, and now the law will take its course." By now I was shivering. And then he says, "Jao." He threw us out of his office. And as I was going out, I don't know what got into me. I turned around and I said, "Sir, the news will get out. It's not every day in the world that an executive of a company goes to jail. And people will read the story in the New York Times or Washington Post. And tell me, what will they think of us when they read that here was a company was doing so much good during an epidemic in a country, and you rewarded the executive of that company with jail, 3 years of jail." So I mentioned 3 years of jail to remind him that what will they think of our prime minister, and what will they think of you, who's recommending a jail sentence? He says, "Are you threatening me?" I said, "No, I'm just telling you this is what's going to happen. I don't have to leak out the news. It'll come out." Anyway, he says, "Jao." So when we came out of his office, the lawyer said, "You idiot, you should have fallen on your knees and begged for mercy. And look at you threatening this guy." Anyway, the government saw sense, and I had lots of sleepless nights, but they dropped the inquiry. And at that point, I became a class. I abandoned the Congress party, which I always voted for, like my family, and I became a liberal and no longer a socialist because I had seen the ugly side of license Raj and, and socialism. And I joined the Swatantra Party. And I tell you, it was a great moment in my life to meet Rajaji, Minu Masani, that fat guy, Pilu Modi, and all these characters, and really realize, and in fact, my education had been at Harvard, so I had read a lot of the
Yes.
liberal literature before that.
And that took you a step forward. I'm sure many of you didn't realize that your parents or grandparents using Vicks nearly landed him in jail, you know,
So,
just for meeting a demand.
anyway, 1991 is when we got our economic freedom. Nehru was a very well meaning man, but unfortunately, the ethos of that era was socialism. And the only model at that time in the 50s was the Soviet Union. And to me, the worst possible document produced in India was the second 5 year plan of Mahalanobis, which turned the whole authority of the economy to the state. And, and therefore, I believe that we lost 2 generations of our uh, of young people's opportunities because there was no other way you could become middle class unless you got a government job. And so our economic history begins in 1991 and not in 1947. Um,
That was, yeah, that's really. You spoke about this as being one step towards your liberal journey. And you've talked about the dilemma of being an Indian liberal in the year 2024. Uh, what are the dilemmas that you're talking about? You've listed them in the book, but how would you say it's difficult to be a liberal today?
well, um, yeah, so fast forward to 2024 from 1991. And, uh, India is a land of ironies that when I was growing up, we were a proud democracy when Nehru's had created the institutions of so much freedom, religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of political freedom, but he had denied us economic freedom. And the irony is that we had all this wonderful other freedoms, and today we have a dynamic economy that's poised to go places, and a liberal economy, uh, but our politics are turning illiberal just at that time. I mean, there was one moment, I would say 2011 would be that moment, when we had it all, meaning we were a successful democracy, we were a successful economy because from 2002, 2000, from Vajpayee's last years up to the UPA 1, we had grown almost at 8%, 7.7% for those 12 years. So we had it both. And I was invited to the Arab Spring in Egypt because the Arabs also were looking to India, and somebody had read India Unbound. And so they invited me. And the Arabs had 3 questions in, in that program. And one of them asked me, how did you keep the generals out of power? And I said, nobody has asked that question in India for the last 65 years. And I realized how special we were because most countries, including Pakistan, were under
Yeah.
generals. Then the second question they asked was, how did you become such a fine secular society? This is 2011. And I said, that's a good question. And I talked about Sarva Dharma Sambhava and all the Ashoka and all that. But really, the fact is, it was very special. What they said, you don't realize what a great country you are. Because they in Egypt were worried about the Muslim Brotherhood taking over their democracy. And that's exactly what happened. And the third question they asked was, and this is Bangalore, so this is the right place. The third question was, how did you get that outsourcing business in software? We'd like to get it too. I said, go to Bangalore and find out. Anyway,
Yes, you did speak like the changes in society which we cannot ignore.
yes.
And you've spoken in this book about Hindu liberalism without one overarching god, without one single religious book which dictates
Yeah,
everything.
yeah,
And you mentioned that the rise of Hindu nationalism does have you worried.
yeah,
And you listed among the challenges to liberalism since the time of independence, whether it's partition, the license Raj, emergency, and
yeah.
then Hindu nationalism.
Right, right.
I'd like you to expand on that
Yeah,
a bit more, but I'd first like to ask you if you wrote your book India Unbound,
right.
encouraged by what was happening, what would you title a book today?
Well, you've asked me a number of questions, but I haven't answered your other question. Do we have time for
We
me to
have
answer that
10
question?
minutes. We have 10 minutes. Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay, you asked me what is the dilemma of the Indian liberal. And the dilemma is very simply that a liberal has really no one to vote for. He, a liberal cannot vote for the BJP because it's making our democracy illiberal. But it can't vote for the opposition either because their route to create, I mean, for 10 years, the opposition has not come up with one answer to India's real problems. Problems of jobs, problems of education, improving education, health, and clean air in Delhi. I come from there, so that's on top of my mind. So, also, a liberal cannot hope to get elected in India. I mean,
You mentioned only one liberal who can get elected.
well, but let me talk about how if 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 a, the average person, if a liberal got on stage as a candidate and stood for election, what would he say? Well, he said, I would create conditions for investment, there'd be jobs, I'll improve the schools and the healthcare and so on. And the other guy who's, another candidate against me, he'll say, from the moment I get elected, I'll give you electricity free, I'll give the women pocket money, a lakh of rupees, pocket money per year. This is what Rahul Gandhi has promised. So who do you think the voter will vote for? Of course, they'll vote immediate lakh of rupees free electricity. And they say by the time all the benefits come from improved schools and improved investment and jobs, you'll be gone. So it's electoral politics. Anyway, the point is that a liberal cannot hope to get elected. A liberal, there's no liberal party. Unfortunately, Swatantra Party is gone, and we have no one to vote for. And so it's a lonely place for a liberal. And in my case, it's a place where I have lost my friends because I lost the friends on the right when I criticized Modi for Gujarat 2002, and then I criticized Modi for demonetization. I lost my friends on the left when I voted for Modi in 2014. I must confess to you that I did that because I was so disgusted with UPA 2. I was very close to what was going on. It was totally paralyzed, the government. It was corrupt. And, Manmohan Singh had been one of my heroes, 1991. And he did nothing. I mean, he really let me down. And so I voted for Modi, and Modi's message was so enticing. Minimum government, maximum governance. My God, it's music to a liberal's ears. Only he hasn't done it. His Vikas, he spoke Vikas 500 times for every time he mentioned Hindutva. So there you are, but now it's different. So it's a lonely place.
A side note, he says there's only one liberal who can get elected in India. Any guesses? Shashi Tharoor. Is this
And Chandrababu Naidu also.
a phase? You've talked about the decline in our democratic institutions. You've talked about the polarization of society, the rise of Hindu nationalism. Is this a phase, or are we going constantly downwards looking for temples underneath mosques? When will
Yeah,
this end?
no, that's a very good question. What's the future? What's the future of liberalism? And believe it or not, after all I've said, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because liberalism, one, is too decent, too sensible a philosophy. Uh, and no wonder it's been the reigning ideology of the world for 250 years, and it has liberated human beings all over the world, in all the countries where monarchy has been displaced by democracy and the market has displaced feudalism and so on. Liberalism has faced far worse enemies. It defeated fascism in World War II. It defeated communism when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. So today, it's this what we are facing is very small compared, and it's all over the world, by the way. This disenchantment with liberalism is very small, and so history is cyclical. And so if we abandon liberalism, you can be sure our children or grandchildren will return back to it. Besides, one more thing for India. India's temper is liberal. And this is a very important thing because when this European idea came to India on the coattails of the British Raj, frankly, Indians added their own spin to this idea by talking, whether it was Vivekananda or Ramon Roy or Mahatma Gandhi, they talked about inner freedom. Inner freedom. We added that. And so the Indian, as Amartya Sen wrote, is an argumentative person. Indian is disobedient. Indian questions everything. And the beginning of, the most holy and the most ancient Veda, the Rig Veda, has a verse called the Nasadiya Sukta, which talks about how was they asked the question, how was the cosmos created? So they said, well, let's ask the gods. Oh no, the gods came afterwards. Then this another says, oh no, let's ask the Brahmins. Oh no, no, they're always arguing with each other. We get confused. And so they go back and forth, and finally they conclude that maybe we don't know. Now, for the most ancient Veda to say that we don't conclude is the spirit, the speculative spirit of our country. And that's why I say, whether it's the mental experiments of the Upanishads or the fact that we have 330 million gods, in which no god can afford to feel jealous. And when the Christianity came to Bengal, the peasants of Bengal welcomed the missionaries. And they said, "Welcome, we'll make Jesus Christ one of our avatars. What would you like? Would you like him to be an avatar of Vishnu or Shiva?" So that's who we are. And we are a liberal, tempered people. And democracy is suited for our temper and not a dictatorship. So that's why I'm hopeful about
You are
future.
hopeful. That is good to hear.
Yeah.
That is very good to hear. I must say that you've spoken about the lonely road of the Indian liberal, but I think reading this, listening to your views, and seeing the response here, I think it's less lonely. We're not alone. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure talking.